Hi, welcome to another episode of Montana Shares, your opportunity to find out about the nonprofits that make our state so great. I'm your host, Bill Crane, and today I have Mike Schechtman from the Big Sky Institute but we'll probably refer to it as BSI. So, Mike, welcome, and tell us about BSI.
Well, Big Sky Institute for the Advancement of Nonprofits is basically referred to as an infrastructure organization because it works behind the scenes. And our mission is really about building Montana's communities through two key strategies: strengthening nonprofits and expanding philanthropy. And we do that through usually big multi-year projects that have ranged from, in our early years, incubating the startup of the Montana Nonprofit Association, to, in sort of mid-years, the development of new community foundations, a big effort in Park County to launch theirs. So that's just kind of a quick snapshot.
And so what were the circumstances? You started about 15 years ago, is that right?
Actually, the first conversations were about 20 years ago.
But those were on beer napkins or something, probably.
Well, the big story was the margaritas, and that was what led to the founding of it. But when we began conversations among various colleagues working in the sector in our state, we really were looking at situations where in many other states, particularly larger population states, tremendous number of resources for nonprofits that we didn't have in Montana. And it's actually a tale of jealousy and envy and heartburn and angst that we didn't have these things here. And finally, after several years of trying to figure out how to make it happen, we just said, enough. It's time to start an organization with that mission to start making that happen here. So that was really the tale of fairly experienced people in the nonprofit world in our state who had a lot of regional and national work that saw great resources that great organizations in this state ought to have access to as well.
So basically you started out, one of the big things was the Philanthropic Divide Initiative. Is that basically correct?
That was came on very early because as we got to see what it was nonprofits in our state wanted through a lot of town meetings, we realized early on, well, we had to grow philanthropy as well. There's going to a real need for more resources. And when we started looking at how do we go about this and started talking with national foundations, it was amazing how they felt, because Montana had so few people, we didn't need a lot of foundations. So we began doing the research, and this came out ultimately as the Philanthropic Divide, that documented the 10 states with the least amount of foundation assets as contrasted with the 10 that had the most, that there was a huge gap in terms of the amounts, and that gap was getting larger and larger when you began to look at 5-year intervals. And that really struck us, not just because we're under-resourced for nonprofits in general, but for a lot of the kinds of capacity building, infrastructure development, new programs that help nonprofits as they've developed around the country. It's been foundations that have been the key investors of that, typically big foundations with professional staff that are involved. And we didn't have that kind of platform in the foundation world in Montana. So we began a lot of work around talking to the 10 states that were similarly situated, the Dakotas, Idaho, Alaska, Mississippi, New England states as well, because they were rural and low population. And that really led to getting Max Baucus involved, which brought attention to this from national funders about this real huge discrepancy in assets. So that was something that really stood out to begin to do education about this kind of inequity in terms of philanthropic resources for an entire country.
And so where did we come in Montana as a state 15 years ago, and where are we now? How has it changed?
Well, the big picture is that assets have grown in our state, not as substantially as bigger states. Our early reviews about 25 years ago, we had something like 63 million in total assets. now we're well over $1 billion. So that's significant growth. But when you pull out Gianforte Foundation and the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, they're a huge part of that.
Right.
And so we were down pretty close to the bottom, about 47th nationally. We're now about 45th, so some modest growth. What's probably more important is that we've had a number of foundations who've been on great learning curves through their own diligence, who have gotten a lot more knowledgeable about needs of nonprofits, and some of them help invest in shares, some of them invest in Montana Nonprofit Association, some invest in us, who really see that to get their project dollars leveraged, strengthening nonprofits really is a good tool to complement that.
Now you've also, in the last few years, you've kind of switched your focus. You used to be more statewide focused, and now you're doing more community-based work. Is that anywhere close to correct assessment?
That's in the right ball court.
There we go.
Part of it in the early years was this lack of infrastructure in the state, and programs being developed were more statewide in nature. And part of it in some ways was our own learning curve about how things played in different parts of the state. And it was useful for us to really be in different communities all over. But as it became more and more clear to us with more infrastructure in place, is that ultimately our work needs to be about systemic change. And that works best and most powerfully at the community level. And so we've moved to now more and more of our programs, like the work we do in Helena, being much more intensively in one community, working with a lot more nonprofits. So you get that kind of cultural shift because of a lot of groups learning and working together that leads to more long-term sustainable systemic change.
Great. So is the Helena Development Roundtable sort of an example of that type of work, or is there another example you'd share?
Well, that's a really great example. Thank you, Bill. You know, there's a lot of concerns about what's going to happen with the federal budget. Is there going to be less money around for nonprofits? And a way to really deal with this kind of change going on in the society is through collaboration and sharing and helping one another. Well, you can't do that very well if the nonprofits are strangers. So our roundtable, which is a monthly meeting and seminar on different fundraising topics, is free. It's underwritten by, well, largely underwritten by Opportunity Bank of Montana, so we could make this opportunity free so that people have networking time and as well as learning time together. And out of that, you start the relationship building, and we've seen a number of cases where people have coffee afterwards and start really doing that kind of sharing, which saves a huge amount of dollars.
I know in the work that I do with Montana Shares, we go to a national conference of community shares, and kind of eliminating the isolation that can go with any nonprofit it does change the community significantly. You don't see each other as competitors anymore. You see yourself as collaborators, and so I think it's been really great to have that developed here in Helena.
Well, we get a lot of good feedback. We started out with something that had been in its infancy that was bringing 8 to 10, sometimes 12 people together, and kind of took it on under the umbrella of our Helena Development Initiative, and now we typically are having 20, 25 people at a meeting, and sometimes as many as 30.
Perfect example. So let's see, last November, I think, you had a kind of a celebration of community philanthropy. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, and I just happen to have a little prop here. We'll see if this can work. But basically, Big Sky Institute, like most any other nonprofit here in the community, really has a great appreciation of all philanthropy. And we love people giving money to whatever the cause, and whether it's just kids or it's just the arts or it's Carol or it's St. Pete's, wonderful. But a number of us have a particular concern about long-term community building. And so we've developed a real appreciation of donors who are very oriented towards giving broadly in the community, being inclusive in the community. So with our inaugural event that we had last November, we honored Tony and Clark Broadbent and Alan and Nancy Nicholson as basically great role models of giving broadly in the community. And that's something that we will continue to have bigger events, doing very much the same, of lifting up this large aspect of inclusive community building and making sure that funding does in one way or another get to not only popular causes, but niche things that are important, but sometimes not all that visible in the community. And as one aspect that we really are going to be forward thinking for the future, in our coming event this year, we're going to have a special focus on youth and youth in philanthropy. There's some great things happening with kids and different schools and classes. So we want to recognize that, celebrate it, lift it up, inspire other kids, because those are going to be the future philanthropic leaders of tomorrow.
I think what Tony and Clark and Nancy and Alan do phenomenal work, but I have to also sort of plug the men on the street, so to speak, that go to the Lawson Foundation things, that do workplace giving. Our town is jam-packed with giving people. It just, from top to bottom, it's a giving town, right?
It is, absolutely.
I mean, we make that kind of change at all levels, and your students are the perfect example of just starting where, starting with like the pennies in the jar. Those add up, and then dollars add up after that, and it becomes thousands, and then eventually millions. And I think that's a key piece of fundraising.
Yeah, we've been doing a little research on some of the organizations that have been holding large events. There's been some concern by some nonprofits. Is it oversaturated in our community? So far, the data is telling us not yet. These continue to grow. It continues to bring in new people. And it's something that is just strengthening that culture in our community.
Great. So we have a top to bottom, just great community in my opinion, without a doubt. So you've had all these years of experience and worked at all different levels and looking at the situation. What kind of advice can you share with the nonprofit world, with any other aspect of philanthropy or giving?
I guess, above and beyond stay healthy and take your vitamins, I think a couple of things really stand out. One is invest in staff. Invest from the point of view of skill development, training, helping them grow and learn, and grow the resources so that compensation retains them and keeps them so they don't leave for better paying jobs, though it does happen. The second thing is invest in boards, and there's a lot of great stories of organizations doing really well, and in many cases, part of the big reason is their boards are really engaged, and they're ambassadors to the community, and they help open doors, and they bring skills, perspectives. So that's sort of the second thing, and these are kind of basics, but sometimes they need to be repeated. The third, which really stands out now with some of the things that we're seeing in headlines from Washington, D.C., is diversify your funding. And in particular, if your organization has been very dependent on government money, that's a vulnerable place to be these days, and really start looking at how to diversify. And the last things are collaborate, share resources, learn from each other. But also, a lot of our biggest problems are complex. It's not going to be just education, or it's not going to be just a youth focus. It's going to be a lot of dimensions coming together cohesively to solve problems. And not only is that, we think, the way to be going, but that's also where a lot of the national funding is going. They're looking for collective impact. And for Montana, with our small population, one group coming in to work on a project in Helena and asking a big foundation to put money in is a very different story than 20 groups working together, having scale and impact and a diversity of skills and experience to really make a difference in the community. So those are the messages that stand out for me.
Right. And just real quick, what's Give us a fun example of some great collaboration you've experienced lately. Anything come to mind?
Well, I think the easy one, which was a small collaboration, was working with Exploration Works on this first inaugural event that we had. But the second, which has been intriguing for us, is work with foundations that are unstaffed, don't have a lot of money, but want to see their grantees do better, where we formed collaborative work with them, pooling dollars and skills that has led to a really great capacity building program that we've been running for a number of years. And the funders get a lot of ownership, and not every funder wants to collaborate, but for those who really see that their small grant making program can be leveraged when they work with other funders, so it makes transformational differences in nonprofits, it's been very powerful for them.
Just another real quick one I think you're involved in is the excellence in nonprofit communication, where all these businesses work together with one particular nonprofit to really propel them in their mission. And I think that's a perfect example of people collaborating. It's the other side of the equation, sort of collaborating. And so there's tons of things in this town that are really interesting to me.
Well, and as we've seen from the awardees who've been through the program, it fundamentally changes their communications program, their message, and we got a great one-year follow-up from Family Promise about how dramatically increased the number of clients being served, the number of congregations involved, their funding went up, and it was really giving them, through these different partners working together, a great set of tools to tell an important story in more powerful ways.
Great. So if we were to close on one word 3 times, it's collaborate, 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 right?
Yes, yes, yes.
There we go. Well, thanks for coming in. It's good to chat with you a little bit. It's been a little while since I've seen you. So thank you guys for tuning in today, and have a great evening.